Thanks for tuning in to your daily dose of quick real estate updates, local housing trends, and market data, plus tips, tools, and strategies to help you buy, rent, or invest with confidence. You're now getting ready with RealiCare Reports, powered by the innovation team, Cami and Rex. Now go grab your favorite morning breakfast, coffee or tea, and let's enjoy today's episode.
Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hello.
Today, we're really getting into state housing policy meeting local reality.
Yes, specifically Florida's Live Local Act.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at how one city, Palm Bay, is actually handling it on the ground.
Exactly. We've managed to get hold of some pretty detailed documents from the City of Palm Bay's website.
Straight from the source. It outlines how they're navigating this whole state law thing.
Right. So what we want to do today is unpack this. What is the Live Local Act really? What does it actually make cities like Palm Bay do?
And then use these Palm Bay docs to see the exact steps a developer would have to take there. Get into the specifics.
Let's jump in.
Okay, so starting with the basics. The Live Local Act, that's Florida Senate Bill 102, Chapter 2023-17.
And it kicked in when?
July 1st, 2023. So yeah, it's pretty recent.
Okay. And the documents, they use this specific term for it, land use preemption. What exactly are we talking about there?
Yeah, that's really the core of it. Preemption means the state is basically saying, okay, local governments on this specific issue, our rules override yours, or at least limit your control.
So the state's stepping in on land use decisions.
For certain things, yes. The act specifically requires cities and counties to set up an administrative, sort of streamlined review and approval process for certain affordable housing projects.
So it's taking away some of that local back and forth, the usual discretion?
Exactly. For these qualifying projects, it's less about local debate and more about checking the boxes administratively.
So it's not just a suggestion from the state, it's a mandate for a specific process.
Precisely. It's a top-down directive aimed at smoothing the path, you could say, for these particular developments.
Okay, so which developments, where can these projects actually be built under this act? Is it anywhere?
No, definitely not anywhere. And the Palm Bay materials are clear on this. The project has to be in an area that's already zoned for commercial, industrial, or mixed-use purposes.
Gotcha. So you can't just drop one of these in the middle of a single-family neighborhood, unless the zoning already allows something like that.
Right. Stick to the existing commercial, industrial, or mixed-use zones.
Okay, makes sense. Now, what about the project itself? What makes a development actually qualify for this special state-mandated process?
All right, so the sources lay this out pretty clearly. First, there are some baseline requirements in the Florida statutes, Section 125.01055. But the really defining part, it's the affordability piece.
Okay, what's the deal there?
A pretty big chunk of the rental units have to be designated as affordable. The law says at least 40%. 40% of the total units.
40%, wow. And affordable, like who are we talking about? Who qualifies to live in these units?
We're talking about income-eligible households. And the definition they use is households earning at or below 120% of the area median income, the AMI.
Okay, 120% of AMI. So a specific income group. And how long does that affordability have to last? Is it just for a few years?
No, this is a major commitment. It has to be guaranteed, locked in for at least 30 years.
30 years. That is quite a while for a development project.
It really is a substantial commitment.
So let me recap. If a developer proposes a project, it's in the right zone, commercial, industrial, mixed use, and they commit to that 40% of units being affordable at or below 120% AMI for 30 years. Then the state preemption kicks in. That's when the local process changes.
That's exactly it. At that point, the local government, like Palm Bay, their hands are kind of tied. They have to allow these multifamily or mixed-use residential projects administratively.
And this is where it gets really interesting, the preemption part. What sort of local hurdles or approvals are cities and counties basically blocked from requiring for these projects?
This is really where the act bites, according to the sources. For these eligible projects, local governments can't make them go through a lot of the usual hoops that take time, money, and involve, local political decisions.
Like what specifically?
Things like needing a zoning change or getting a special exception or a conditional use permit. Also, variances or even needing an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan. All those are essentially off the table.
Wow. So wait, a lot of those steps involving planning boards, public hearings, council votes, those just get skipped if the project meets the state's live local criteria.
Pretty much, yeah. The idea is if it fits the state definition, the approval should be administrative based on the rules, not subject to that kind of local discretionary review.
That's huge.
And there's more. The sources also mentioned that this preemption, it says in limited circumstances, can also apply to local rules about the use itself, the density, the building height, floor area ratio, FAR, and even parking requirements.
Okay, that covers the big picture of the state law.
Yeah.
But we're looking specifically at Palm Bay. How does the city actually put this into practice? Do they just follow the state, or do they have their own local twists?
Oh, they definitely have areas where they make their own calls. And the Palm Bay documents really highlight one big decision they made about tax exemptions. Oh, tell me about that. What did Palm Bay do?
Well, the city council there, they voted, unanimously actually, 5-0. They decided not to offer local property tax exemptions for live local acts projects built in the city.
So they could have offered a tax break as an extra incentive, but they chose not to.
Correct. And it's interesting, the source material points out this wasn't them ignoring the state. There was another state law, House Bill 7073 from 2024, that specifically gave city councils the discretion, the choice, on whether or not to offer these tax incentives for live local projects.
Ah, yeah.
So Palm Bay's decision, which they documented in Resolution 2024-46, was them using that specific local power granted by the state.
That's fascinating. It shows the state mandates the core process, but leaves some pretty big financial pieces, like taxes, up to the locals.
Okay, so let's say I'm a developer. I have a qualifying project. I want to build in Palm Bay using this live local process.
Yeah.
What are the actual steps I need to take according to their documents?
All right, the Palm Bay docs break it down. First things first, you have to have a pre-application meeting with city staff. You can't just submit plans cold.
Start with a conversation.
Yeah.
Makes sense. What happens after that meeting?
Then you submit the formal application, and they use an online system, the IMS portal.
Okay, standard online submission. What needs to go in it?
You need a written narrative. Basically, you have to explain how your project meets the state law's requirements. And they want specifics in that narrative, square footage for different uses, if it's mixed use, total number of units, proposed height, that kind of thing.
So don't just say it qualifies. Show them how with the details.
Yeah.
What else is critical up front?
Yes, and this is a big one. The Land Use Restrictions Agreement, the LURA. You, the applicant, have to submit a draft LURA with your application package.
Whoa, wait. You submit the draft legal document that restricts your own property right at the beginning?
Yep. It gets reviewed by the city's community development folks and the city attorney's office.
And the LURA, that's the thing that locks in the 30-year affordability, right?
That's the enforcement mechanism, exactly. Ensures compliance down the road. And interestingly, the documents say the city staff has a standard LURA form available.
Okay.
But they actually encourage applicants to draft and propose their own version for the city to review. And ultimately, the city council has to approve it.
Huh. So the developer takes the first crack at writing the restrictions. That's different.
Yeah.
Now, back to that first step, the pre-application meeting. What should a developer be ready to talk about then?
The sources flag a few key discussion points for that meeting. Number one, obviously, you got to show how your project is consistent with the Live Local Act itself. Hit those main points. 40% units, 120% AMI, 30 years.
Makes sense. Prove you belong in this process.
Right. Then you'll talk about site design requirements, the physical layout, how it fits.
Standard stuff. What else?
This is important. They want to discuss your financial capacity, not just to build it, but to sustain the affordability for the full 30 years.
Ah, the long-term financial health.
Exactly. And tied to that, you need to show you have qualified program management resources lined up.
Program management resources. What does that entail? Like, who's going to handle the paperwork?
Pretty much. It means having the people and systems in place to properly check resident incomes to make sure they're eligible, and then track and ensure the rents stay affordable according to the rules year after year for 3 decades.
Okay, so they're really focused on making sure that 30-year promise is real and manageable. It's not just about getting the building permit.
Definitely not. The long-term compliance seems like a major focus for Palm Bay.
So how do they actually enforce that? How do they monitor it over those 30 years?
It circles back to that LURA or something similar. The documents call it a restrictive covenant requirement. Basically, the property owner must sign and deliver this legal document. Could be a covenant, a declaration of restriction, a deed restriction that favors the city.
And the city attorney has to approve the form of that document.
Correct. And the timing on this is really crucial, according to the source.
When does it have to be done?
It must be approved and officially executed before the city issues a building permit.
Before you can even start construction.
Before you get the permit. And you, the applicant, have to pay to get it recorded in the public records. So think about that you're legally tying up your property for 30 years before you can hammer the first nail. That's a significant upfront step.
No kidding. What about after the building is up and people move in?
The monitoring continues. For that whole 30-year affordability period, the owner have to keep submitting documents. Proof that the units are still meeting the affordability criteria laid out in the state statutes, specifically Section 420.0004.
So, ongoing reporting. Is there a set schedule for that?
Apparently, that reporting schedule gets established during the site plan review phase, so you know going in how often you'll need to submit the proof.
Okay. And who at the city keeps track of all this paperwork for 30 years?
That falls to the Community and Economic Development Department. They're the ones who monitor compliance. The documents even say they'll provide training on how to meet the requirements.
That's helpful. Training is good.
Yeah, and they specifically tell developers, contact us when construction is done, but before you start taking applications from potential residents, get everything set up right from the start for compliance.
That seems like a smart move. Avoid problems later. Now, if someone listening needs more info directly from Palm Bay on this, did the sources give contact details?
They did. For more questions based on the city's materials, you can call the Land Development Division at 321-733-3042 or shoot an email to landdevelopmentweb@palmbayflorida.org.
Great. Okay, let's try and wrap this up. We've gone deep into Florida's Live Local Act, using Palm Bay's own information as our guide.
Yeah, so we saw it's a state law kicked in last year, forces an administrative approval pathway on local governments.
Right, but only for specific affordable housing projects, those in commercial, industrial, or mixed-use zones, dedicating at least 40% of units to folks at or below 120% AMI, and keeping it that way for 30 years.
And the big hook is that it preempts, it overrides a lot of the usual local discretionary reviews, zoning changes, variances, stuff like that, sometimes even density, height, parking rules.
But then we saw Palm Bay making its own choices within that state framework, like deciding not to offer local tax breaks, which another state law allowed them to do.
And they have a very specific local process. The mandatory pre-app meeting, the online portal, needing that draft LURA up front.
And that critical step of getting the final restrictive covenant signed and recorded before a building permit, plus the 30 years of monitoring by their Community and Economic Development Department.
That really covers the key takeaways from their documents.
You know, looking at all this, what strikes me is that balance, or maybe tension, between the state mandate and the local implementation.
Definitely. The state says you will streamline this, preempting local control in a big way, but then it leaves things like tax policy on the table.
And the city still has to figure out the actual day-to-day process, the forms, the staffing, for monitoring that 30-year commitment. It's not insignificant.
No, not at all. It really shows how a state law lands differently depending on how the local government decides to handle the parts it can control. Those details, the LURA timing, the monitoring intensity that shapes what it actually means to build affordable housing under this act in a specific place like Palm Bay.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts matter. So a final thought maybe for you listening, consider this interplay. You have a state trying to push a policy goal, affordable housing, by taking some power away from local government, but locals still hold certain cards and have to manage the long-term reality. What does that mix of state preemption and required local action, down to the level of detail we saw in Palm Bay, tell us about tackling big issues like housing?
It's definitely not simple. It involves layers of government, detailed procedures, and these really long-term commitments that need careful management. It's a complex puzzle for sure.
Indeed it is. Thanks for exploring the Live Local Act in Palm Bay with us on this deep dive.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of Reality Reports, where real estate meets real life. For more updates, tools, and insights that will help you buy, rent, or invest with confidence, be sure to follow, subscribe, stay connected, stay informed, and stay ready. Until next time.